I don't know if there's another football program out there with quite the rich history and traditions that the University of Michigan has going back very, very far. Jon Falk knows so much more about the inner workings of that program over there. He's a former equipment manager for 40 years. In his book, 40 years in the book, in the book house. In the big house is now on the shelves, and decades of stories from players to coaches to probably some interesting booster stories and fan stories. Jon, I mean, how did you compact everything into, what is this, a couple hundred pages?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, how did you do that?
Well, Dan Ewald and I did it together, and Dan was able to consolidate a lot of the talk that I gave him and put it into words that people understand. But you know, the thing of it is, when you work at Michigan for 40 years, like I have, the people you meet, the coaches you work with, the players. I mean, Tom Brady. I take Tom Brady. I used to walk in the locker room all the time, and I'd always walk around and I'd say, you know, I got 17 Big Ten championship rings, and everybody always asked me, which ring is my best ring? And I always said my best ring was my next ring. Well, Tom Brady loved that. So after Tom Brady left and went to the New England Patriots, he won his second world championship ring, and somebody in the background said, hey, you've won 2 world championship rings now. Which one's your best ring? And he always said, got equipment manager back at Michigan, Big John. He always said his best ring is going to be his next ring, and that's just the way it is. And those are little things that Bo told me when I first came to Michigan. He said, John, I want you in that locker room talking to those players every day. I want you to talk to them about the passion that it takes to win for Michigan. And I want you to be positive in that locker room every day with those players and teach them that they need to play their best for Michigan. And that's what I've done. Brian Greasy, Jim Harbaugh. I mean, I remember when Jim Harbaugh, of course I knew Jim when he was a young boy back in school, and they left to go to Stanford. And I went into Bo one day after heard he was getting recruited by Miami of Ohio. And I said, Bo, what's the story here? Jim Harbaugh is going to be recruited by Miami of Ohio? Bo looked at me and he said, let me tell you something, Falk. He's coming to Michigan. He doesn't know it yet, but he's coming to Michigan. And that's just the relationship that Bo had with Jim Harbaugh and his dad, and the history of the Harbaughs at Michigan. And I remember in 1986, Bo had a chance to break the record for most wins as a coach at Michigan. So Jimmy came into me and he said, hey, Big John, can you do us a favor? Go out and buy us a nice plaque to give to Bo after the Minnesota game this year, because that's when he's going to break the record. So I went out and I built a beautiful $400 plaque. I had everything gold-plated, Bo Schembechler, the date, the score. I had everything set for Minnesota. Well, they beat us 20-17. So the next week I saw Jimmy. I said, look, Jimmy, the Ohio State game's big this year, but I got a $400 trophy that we need to give to Bo. And I went out, I got it fixed up, and Jimmy laughed the whole week. He said, Big John, we're going to win that game so we can give Bo that plaque. And he said, you know what, John? It's so fitting for Bo to break the record against Ohio State. And that's what happened. And Jim brought us back. We were down 14-3. And you talk about a cruel bunch of people. When Jimmy took the field, of course, he had guaranteed that they were going to beat Ohio State, and everybody in Columbus was just on Jimmy. We came in on Friday, and our truck had lost its brakes. We were heading down a hill, and we hit a semi going through the intersection. And the police came over, the Columbus police, and they investigated the wreck. And the fellow said, what do you have on that truck? And I said, well, sir, I've got Michigan football gear. He said, is Jim Harbaugh's bag on that truck? I said, yes, sir, it is. He said, well, we're going to have to impound this stuff for the next 48 hours. And I looked at him and said, now, sir, and he looked at me and he laughed. He said, you'll have the stuff. He said, let's just write the report. But that's how everybody down in Columbus, Ohio remembers Jim Harbaugh.
With it being the week of the game, obviously neither team is necessarily playing for a chance to go to the Big Ten title unless Michigan State happens to lose. But we talked about it a little earlier. It doesn't lose its luster, no matter the records of these teams. No. One can be great, one can be bad, or vice versa.
The one year in 1988, I remember all of my friends from Ohio were calling me and saying, hey, John, this year Ohio State's got nothing. You should be able to beat them walking away. And it was 20-0 at the half. And I'm in the locker room, I'm going to say, you know what, my buddies were right. The Ohio State, they're good. The next thing you know, it was 24-20. We had not stopped them all day long. And that was the day that Demetrius Brown threw the long pass into the end zone, and John Colasar caught it. and fell into the end zone, and we beat them 34-31. And we had not stopped them the whole second half, except for the last series when they were trying to come back. And that just goes to show you that when Michigan plays Ohio State, both those teams are going to give you their best. Both those teams are going to be in a great attitude, and the best team hopefully can win.
Do you feel that that rivalry is going to go to new heights with Urban Meyer and now Jim Harbaugh at the helm? Is that possible to because the national narrative, and you've heard it, has been like, this is going to be like Woody and Bo. Do you buy into that, or is it different because these guys are different from those two legends?
Listen, I don't know if you'll ever have a Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler 10-year war like you had here. I mean, it was built up that way. Although I will say this. I talked to Bo one day, and we were talking about Ohio State and Michigan. He said, I remember when I came to Michigan, I geared everything I had to beat Ohio State. Then that first year I got beat by Michigan State. He said, I realized then how big the Michigan State game was too. So he said, I had to change my gear and my thinking, and I knew then I had to beat Ohio State. I also had to beat Michigan State. So you have two great rivals in such a small area, and it's just so fun to be able to play both those teams. And Ohio State is a little special because it's across the border, and Bo made it special by all the Ohio players that used to come to Michigan. Mm-hmm. And Woody, of course, made it big. And then Gary, of course, was the captain of the Ohio State team, and he ended up coaching Michigan. And Lloyd Carr carried on Gary Mulder's legacy. And then we tailed after Lloyd got out. We only beat Ohio State once after that. I mean, at one point in time, my record against Ohio State was 17-9-1. When I retired in 2013, my record ended up being 19-20-1. So I mean, I used to tease Jim Truss all the time. I'd say, Truss, I've studied that the longer you're in this Ohio State-Michigan game, the closer to 500 you're going to get. And Truss never got close. He just never got close. But that's just the way that rivalry is. And I guarantee you come to that game on Saturday at Michigan, you're going to see two teams playing their best, two teams playing their hardest, and I think it's going to be one great game.
I'm looking forward to it, absolutely. I have to ask you this because it just sounds from talking to you. Do you feel part of you helped shape this program? I mean, I'm asking in a humble sense, seeing as how you've been around. You've been a consistent factor. And the fact that, to me, that Bo asked you to go in there and say things to kids and to have conversations with players and stuff like that, can you say that you are part of Michigan? I mean, as far as, do you believe, when I say that to you, do you say there's truth to that?
I just want to say that I did the best I could. I worked as hard as I could to help Michigan win football games. And Tim Trebno, who is our offensive coordinator, I've been going on the road with Jim the last 3 games, and he said after the Minnesota game, he came in and told Jim himself, because Jim told me this. He said, you know what? I watched Jon Falk in that locker room before the game, going around to all those players, patting them on the back, saying, play hard, play your best, play for Michigan. And he said, now I know why Michigan's been so successful, because of guys like him that have been around, and we take those players, and they're special. And you want them to play your best. And that's what Bo always taught me. That's what Mo taught me, Lloyd taught me. When Rich came in, I had to go in and I talked to Rich about the history of Michigan. And Rich started to understand the history of Michigan. And of course, Brady knew the history of Michigan, and he knew how valuable that he could use me when he got to be the head coach. And I think that's all you want to do. It's your job to make Michigan successful and to make that head football successful. People ask me about Rich Rodriguez, and they said, how'd you do with Rich? And I said, well, first of all, he was a confidant of mine. He really trusted me. And I said to myself one day, what would Bo want me to do in this instance? And I know for a fact, Bo would say, Falk, he's the head football coach at the University of Michigan. You do whatever you can to help him. You do whatever you can to help Michigan win. And his last day on the job, I went in to see him. My wife, Sherry, and I went in to see him. And I said, Rich, there's 2 things I want to say. Number 1, I wanted to be able to say that I did everything I could for Rich Rodriguez. And 2, I wanted Rich Rodriguez, when he walks out that door for the last time, I want him to turn around and say, you know what? Jon Falk did everything he could to help me. And you know what? He looked at me, he got up and cried. He hugged me, he hugged my wife, Sherry, and he said, Big John, you did everything you could to help here. Thank you so much. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
That's Michigan.
That is. I have to ask about the little brown jug.
Oh, boy.
And your, love for that little trophy?
When I came here, Bo called me in the office. He said, "Now you're the equipment manager, but you're also going to be my player coordinator." He said, "But also you're the trophy coordinator. You're in charge of the little brown jug when we play Minnesota. You're in charge of that Paul Bunyan trophy when we play Michigan State, and you're in charge of that Big Ten championship trophy when we play Ohio State." And he said, "And I want to make sure that they're taken care of." The little brown jug is a special thing because of the history since 1903. And I remember somebody asked me a few weeks ago when they played Minnesota, they said, "Was there ever any time that it was close to that little brown jug breaking?" I said, "Well, Sherry was in visiting in the equipment room. We had a little girl, Katie, our daughter, Katie Falk, and Katie was sitting on the table there, and she hit her arm, and the little brown jug started to swirl, and I looked, and I went over, and I grabbed it just as it was getting ready to fall on the floor, and I turned to Sherry, and I said, 'We can't break this on my watch. Let somebody else worry about it, but we are not going to break this on my watch.'" But yeah, it's special. The Paul Bunyan Trophy is special. It's a big time special. I mean, we hadn't won it for since '08, and then in 12 when we were able to win it, I cried. I said, "Wow!" I said, "We haven't seen Paul around here for so long," and I really missed Paul Bunyan. But that just goes to show you the great rivalry that we have with Michigan State. And I got a nice picture in the book with Tom Izzo and myself. I got a picture in there of the little model of the Paul Bunyan Trophy, and the caption that Michigan State gave me was, "To Jon Falk, a great Wolverine and a great friend of the Spartan family." Now that means a lot to me. We have that at home on our counter at home, and it means a lot because even though you're rivals, you respect them. And I love Tom Izzo. I love the football coaches over there. I know D'Antonio, and I've talked to him quite a bit, and all those guys. And did I want them to lose Saturday? I really, you know what? I just want to win next Saturday. I want to beat Ohio State.
Way to talk yourself into that one and talk yourself out of it. 40 years in the big house. Jon, great stuff.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate you
that.
coming
Yeah.
on. Brad, we'll send it back over to you.